Now to this. Last week, the NBA was rocked by a massive sports gambling scandal. Suspects are accused of rigging bets and setting up illegal poker games. And now the Senate is seeking more information from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. This all happening months after former NBA star Gilbert Arenas was arrested on similar charges. After his indictment in July, Arenas said, "I'm snitching." Here's how he reacted to the news last week.
This ain't info. What is it? Information. Got a lot of information.
All right, now Arenas is denying that he switched or snitched. Now that, as we're learning more about how Terry Rozier's alleged role in all this played out. According to prosecutors, he told his longtime friend that he would bench himself early due to injury back in 2023, and that friend then sold the information to other bettors. Terry was charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering, but he denies any wrongdoing. Joining me now to respond to this is Terry Rozier's attorney, Jim Trusty. Jim, thanks for being with us here today. So, as I understand it, the allegations are that Terry told his friend, Deniro Lassiter, that he would be taking himself out of a game, I believe it's March 23rd of 2023. That friend is alleged to have sold the information to others, and those others placed bets on the prop bet of Terry scoring under, assisting under, shooting under the line set by various bet houses. Now, I think let's start with this. Is it true that Terry told a friend that he would be benching himself early in that game?
Well, look, I don't want to try every little nugget in front of the TV set, but I would just tell you, confiding in a friend, a childhood friend, and saying, "Man, I'm banged up. It's the end of the season. We're out of the playoffs. I think I'm going to sit early in this game." That's not a crime. That's nothing. That's not even prohibited by any sort of statute. That's simply confiding in a friend. And maybe the league should create rules that say you can only tell a manager or a trainer or your priest or your mom. But he told a friend, and whatever that friend did is not on Terry. That's the difference between being indicted for the trophy of a professional basketball player and having solid evidence. The allegations in the indictment itself are thin.
All right, but then the allegations go on not just to the fact that Terry would have shared that information with his friend, which you don't deny, but you say in and of itself isn't a crime, which I would imagine would be true. That's not in and of itself a crime. But the allegations are that friend not only shared that with others to bet on the event of Terry pulling himself out of the game, but that the money came back. The proceeds from that bet came back to Terry Rozier's friend, Deniro Lassiter, and he took that money to Rozier's home.
Yeah, what's interesting about that part, which we very much dispute, even then they don't say, and therefore Terry was a part of this, or Terry knew anything about it. I mean, let me just tell you, Terry Rozier had a $100 million contract and a big shoe endorsement. This indictment actually suggests that he faked the injury, which is absurd. People knew about it. Medical people knew about it. Staff knew about it. Friends knew about it. This was a guy who was banged up after a long 82-game season. The Hornets are out of the playoffs. So he and others were telling the Hornets coaching staff, time to sit him, man. It's a waste. And so when he sat that game and the next 5 or 6 games to end the season, he actually lost money. I mean, it's so contradictory to this kind of sexy gambling story. He lost money on his shoe contract because he didn't play enough games because, like a lot of NBA starters, by game 70, he's got all sorts of issues. In this case, it was his foot. It was a chronic injury. It was just going to get worse if he played for no reason. So he took himself out. And I'm not here to defend Deniro or anybody else in the indictment. There's a bunch of people Terry doesn't even know if he could pick them out of a lineup. And, of course, there's a whole separate indictment that's much sexier in terms of mafia and Chauncey Billups and all the stuff that has nothing to do with Terry at all, except that they decided to lump it in for the press conference. So, look, at the end of the day, I'm not seeing anything that makes me think that Terry should have been charged. This is a situation where a friend took information and ran with it. Terry didn't do anything.
Two very fair points, Jim, in that the illegal poker scheme is not related to the allegations against Terry Rozier, even though they were revealed in the same press conference. And it's also a very legitimate point to make that Terry made a lot of money in the NBA. So much money that it would be irrational. It's hard to understand why he would be leveraging prop bets for an extra 10 or a couple hundred even $1,000. That being said, I don't know the motivations of most criminals. That's not to suggest Terry's a criminal, but far be it from me to suggest that the motivations are always rational of a criminal. So let me just put it to you bluntly. Did Terry ever trade information on his availability in an NBA game for the purposes of illegal betting?
Yeah, that's an easy one to answer. It's an absolute not. Never happened. I think the prosecution basically knows it, but they like the idea of having him as a trophy in this case to kind of mirror the bigger case with Chauncey Billups. And I hope over time they'll start to realize maybe a little bit of buyer's remorse. They bit off more than they can chew. This is an innocent guy who's getting completely screwed, to use some legal vernacular, in terms of his career. It's an 11-year vet. He's played 1,000 games. They're latching on to a game where the NBA literally cleared him 2 years ago and trying to suggest that somehow they know better and that they know he was a conspirator as opposed to just somebody who had a hurt foot.
Okay, one last question for you, Jim. Do you believe that the government might have more information at this point that has not yet been revealed? There is some questions about the relationship of previous players that have been busted. We talked about and played the video of what Gilbert Arenas said on his podcast. Jonte Porter was arrested some time ago. I know that Terry was investigated by the NBA. I know that Terry was cleared by the NBA. Does it concern you? There might be yet more information coming about what Terry may or may have done.
I don't think there's going to be anything that's particularly breathtaking, but of course we don't have any discovery from the prosecution yet. You know, we've got to start making demands and seeing what they have. I tell you, I mean, you raised a good point. Not about Gilbert Arenas, not about Jonte Porter, who my client didn't know, but I am concerned the government might have crawled into bed with some horrific people to try to get their cooperation. Violent people on the gambling side. Again, they're not going to have anything that's honest or direct about Terry, but I am concerned that they're really kind of making deals with the devil to try to work their way down instead of the opposite direction.
Well, to be clear, I want to say this with you present and for everyone watching. Terry is innocent until proven guilty, but we'll pay attention to the details. We appreciate hearing your side of the story, and we'll continue to follow it along in the case. Jim Trusty, thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.